Hi everyone. The topic for Lecture 2 is business level strategy, which speaks to the question of how an organization should compete within its industry. The agenda is to first talk about the key points from the HBS note on creating competitive advantage. And it's just the section on activity analysis of cost and willingness to pay that will be focused on. Next is to identify a number of the most common cost drivers and value drivers for organizations. And this is a topic that's not covered in detail in the HBS note, but it is still very important to understanding business level strategy. And last is an overview of the HBR article on blue ocean strategy. At the end of Lecture 1, we said that strategy is fundamentally about trying to create a competitive advantage. And competitive advantage involves driving a higher wedge between V, customers' perceived value or willingness to pay, and C, costs, than competitors. And we can think of value and cost as the two major competitive levers that firms have at their disposal in formulating and implementing a business level strategy. Raising perceived value generally, but not always, involves raising costs to some extent. A differentiation strategy would involve competing on the basis of unique and desirable features that customers value. An example would be Nordstrom, known for offering designer merchandise and outstanding customer service. While a low-cost strategy involves competing on the basis of low costs, as the term suggests. Walmart is certainly a good example. There's also dual advantage, which means combining elements of low cost and differentiation. Target, for example, offers many products that are more upscale than Walmart's, but they still offer relatively low prices. Activity analysis is an important tool for strategists dealing with business level strategy. And the goal is to break the firm down into its underlying activities and processes and understand each one's implications for cost and willingness to pay. This is a helpful tool because it helps a firm understand if it actually has a competitive advantage, if there are specific ways to increase its competitive advantage, and if there are any emerging changes in competitive advantage. And activity analysis has 4 steps: cataloging activities, using those activities to analyze relative costs, using activities to analyze relative willingness to pay, and exploring options and making choices. To catalog activities, it's helpful to use a template called the value chain. And the value chain classifies activities as either primary or secondary. Primary activities help to directly generate a good or service. Inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, marketing and sales, and service would all be considered primary activities. Support activities help enable the primary activities. We'd consider procurement, technology development, human resource management, and firm infrastructure as support activities. Analyzing relative costs involves calculating costs and identifying the cost drivers for each activity. And this analysis is helpful not only to analyze the company's costs, but it also helps to estimate competitors' cost position. And there are a number of takeaways about cost analysis. The goal is to focus on differences in activities as opposed to only differences in total costs. You should look at categories where costs vary across competitors or across different strategic options, where activities are actually separable, and where costs are big enough to have a significant influence on the company's overall cost position. For activities that have a bigger impact on costs, spend more time drilling down on cost drivers. And only model a cost driver if it varies across competitors or across strategic options. And model the effects of a variation in assumptions. When you analyze relative willingness to pay, keep in mind that almost any activity can influence willingness to pay. And with that said, the process of analyzing willingness to pay involves identifying who the true buyer actually is, determining what the buyer really wants, examining how successful the firm and its competitors are in giving buyers what they want, and tying any differences in success back to specific activities, understanding which activities account for those differences. And the last step in activity analysis is to explore options and make choices. Some basic guidelines: understand what's truly driving each competitor's choices. Think about how competitors might react to a given move. Don't think too narrowly about how buyers might benefit from a particular choice. Give special attention to so-called bleeding edge customers for companies in rapidly changing markets. Consider changes in scope, changing customers served or products offered. And finally, it might make sense to try reversing the activity analysis process suggested in the HBS note, starting with options, and then thinking about what each option implies for activities and for costs and willingness to pay. As helpful as the HBS note is in providing a framework to go about analyzing costs and willingness to pay, one piece that's missing from the reading is a detailed discussion of what some of the most common cost drivers and value drivers actually are across companies and across industries. So slide 10 is meant to provide a list that you can use as a reference of what some of the most common cost drivers are, from economies of scale to incentive systems and culture. Slide 11 provides a reference of common value drivers, from product features and performance to quality control processes. And neither list is comprehensive, but these are some of the most common drivers. Slide 12 highlights some of the major points about blue ocean strategy, the subject of the second reading. The strategy involves creating a new, untapped market instead of competing in an existing market. The Nintendo Wii is often seen as an example of this strategy. The Wii was meant to appeal in particular to customers who previously had not played video games. And going back to the concept of dual advantage from slide 4, Blue Ocean strategy is an illustration of dual advantage. The intent is to break the trade-off between value and cost. A tool called the 4 Actions Framework can help to formulate Blue Ocean strategy. It involves asking 4 questions to challenge an industry's strategic logic. And the 4 actions are eliminate, reduce, raise, and create. The associated questions involve thinking about typical offerings or attributes in an industry, asking what can be eliminated or reduced, what can be raised above the industry standard, and what can be created that hasn't been offered before. So to sum up, the goal of Unit 2 of the course is to review business level strategy, how a firm competes within its industry. And at a high level, a firm can choose a differentiation strategy, low cost strategy, or seek dual advantage, which Blue Ocean strategy speaks to. And tools like activity analysis and the 4 Actions Framework can help firms formulate and implement their strategy.